So today we're going to be talking about the Bellum Octavianum and Sulla's march on Rome. This all starts with Mithridates, who is a foreign king in Cappadocia, Turkey, in that area. He invades Bithynia. So Sulla was the governor of that area, so it was his job to stop Mithridates' expansion. Now, Sulpicius, who you would remember was fairly effective in the social war, had that one good flanking maneuver that saved Pompey, or Gnaeus Pompeius. So he kind of had this statesman-like quality similar to that of Saturnius and Glaucia. At least that's how a lot of the sources compare him to those men. Plutarch is very critical and even mentions that he's kind of whatever graces Saturnius had, Sulpicius lacked even them. So, and technically it's, just so you know, it's Sulpicius, but I'm just going to say Sulpicius because I can't be bothered. So Sulpicius is trying to expand his power, and he is very much a fan of Marius because he saw how Marius helped Saturnius and Glaucia and all the men of that faction of populist. Okay, so really, I'm not going to get into this too much because we're going to talk about it more. We've already kind of covered it in the social war video, but we're going to talk about it a lot during Sulla's civil war. But you have the optimates and populares. So just think of it as the populist class and the elite class. And those are the two competing factors. And there's also the knight class, and that is kind of half optimates, half populares. Then you have, but I'm not going to get into the whole breakdown of Roman societal structure, but a very brief understanding of it is you have at the bottom the plebeian class. Merchants are kind of mixed in. Then you have knights, and then you have the senators. There are senators who are populist. There are probably and certainly knights who are populist. And obviously there are even plebeians who are optimates, who are for the elite or have those values that align with them. So it's not like this is a class is specifically dependent on being a populare or an optimate, but in general, the lower class are populares, or at least they are for social reforms to help the plebeian class. So that is what Sulpicius was doing. Now again, the sources kind of mention that Saturnius, Glaucia, and the men like them, including Sulpicius, are, just doing this not because they really believe in this, but just because they think it's the easiest way to get into power. You can, kind of determine your own idea from that based on their actions. But either way, so Sulpicius did want to get elected, obviously, and he thought the best way to expand his power was if he had the assistance of Marius. Now, as we know, Marius is not the best politician, not this great orator, but still his respect and his loyalty, or rather his opinion, even if it wasn't, or if he was easily out-orated, it would sway people to like certain people if he liked them. I mean, he was still a beloved figure in Rome, and while he might have, again, not been the best politician, the weight of his deeds were massive and carried this large shadow that loomed over the man. So if he approved of you, that was going to help your bid for office. Now Marius, he's also, when you say he's not a good politician, in the sense of, I meant he was not specifically a captivating speaker. Most of the Marian slander is due to his political enemies, in the future tarnishing him. Was he an inept politician? I don't think that's fair to say. In fact, you see a guy who's kind of broken down the middle, even in the social war, even before the social war, like he's trying, just like Scipio Aemilianus was, to try and find that middle ground. I don't think that makes him a bad politician. But obviously his enemies would see that as such. I think what you can at best say about Marius, which is probably clear, is he's not an orator. He didn't have social graces, and he was rather vicious when he would attack his enemies, which made him unpopular in the Senate and elite class. But Marius, again, like I said, was not stupid, because he agreed. He said, absolutely, I will help you get elected, Sulpicius, as long as you agree to give me command of the Mithridatic War. So Sulpicius and Marius are now working together. Sulpicius's aim, get elected, get power. Marius's aim, get control of the Mithridatic War. Now you might be wondering, I'll cover this briefly, why would Marius want command of the Mithridatic War? Again, a lot of this is covered in my Life of Marius video, but Marius kind of fell out of favor and he realized, hey, I'm not the most popular guy. So in times of peace, these other politicians are gaining more popularity than me because they're better speakers. But in times of war, I am Rome's best general. So I will be given control again if we go to war. And so he just figured if I get command of it, people are going to love me because also, and this is a key point, the war with Mithridates when he invaded Bithynia, most of the Romans were incredibly happy about this because they viewed a war with Mithridates as incredibly easy to win. A lot of the people thought it would be an easy campaign that would just further their prestige and pockets. So this is a big deal for Marius. And obviously Sulla, who has the command right now, it's a big deal for him. Sulpicius and Marius say, hey, to do this, to achieve not just my own power, but to get you command of Mithridates, we need votes. So who can we employ to help us? I know just the people who are on our side. So after the conclusion of the social war, all of the Italian rebels that had become new citizens would be obviously on the side of the people who supported them before this war broke out. Sulpicius and Marius extended that if they supported them, they in turn would support them back. So at the time, the consuls were Sulla and Quintus Pompeius. This is not to be confused with Gnaeus Pompeius. This is Quintus Pompeius. This is not the father of Pompey the Great. But at the time, Sulla and Quintus were very, very disturbed by the news of this uplift and support from the new Italian citizens to Sulpicius and Marius. They decided to stall the vote so that perhaps they could just keep their command and not allow Sulpicius into power, to declare a vacation. So obviously if they are on vacation, the vote cannot be commenced because they need to be there, at least one of them, to do the vote. Sulpicius, kind of sensing what they're doing, trying to stall his election, declares that the vacation is illegal and unjust. So this obviously puts all of the supporters of Sulpicius into a frenzy. And an angry mob, armed with daggers and clubs, moved into the Forum in Rome. Sulpicius demanded that both Sulla and Quintus come to the Forum. Quintus kind of sees the mob forming and thinks, yeah, this is not going to go well, so he flees. Yeah, so like I said, Quintus flees, seeing the violent mob, but his son is still there. So the mob, seeing that Quintus has fled, they catch Quintus Pompeius Rufus the Younger, who is the son of Quintus, and he's also the son-in-law of Sulla, and they kill him. So obviously this is not a great start for, keeping a level head and everything, but Sulla now kind of sees what's going on, see that they've killed his son-in-law, and Quintus has fled, and he himself tries to flee. Ironically, as he's leaving the Forum, Marius' house was on the Forum. He had built the house in the Forum because he thought that the reason that some of his other political opponents had gained so much success is because they were close to the Forum. So he builds this very nice house right in front of the Forum, and the sources say that it didn't really grant him any more love of the people, but who knows. But Sulla, kind of knowing that Marius' house is there and thinking, hey, this mob, the one place they're not going to check is my biggest political opponent's house, so he goes and seeks refuge with Marius. Marius grants him refuge in his own house, waits for the mob to have dispersed, and sends Sulla on his way. So in this way, Marius protects Sulla, the man that he wants to take the command of the Mithridatic War away from. He actually saves his life, essentially, and protects him. And this is what I mean about Marius. It's such a confusing character because, he did not believe in nepotism. He was a man who came from nothing. He saves Rome from the Cimbri. The guy has this great political career, and there's so many moments where his character is on display, or his good character is on display, I should say. He defends a man who was on trial for murdering one of his family members, and we find out the man was not innocent. He did murder the family member, but the family member was a self-defense situation, and Marius defends him and actually protects the man when it would have been very, very easy for him to just side with the family member. So it's that was a just thing that he did. Later on, when he is captured, he stays in a woman's house whose trial he presided over, and he didn't rule with her favorably necessarily. It was, he made her pay a fine, but he did give her the dowry that she sought. That was what the trial was over. But she, who everyone thought was going to treat him very harshly, treated him very well and tried to raise his spirits in a tough time for Marius. Like, there's so many instances of Marius's good character, and stepping down from command in the social war, I thought it was even that, because he thought he was too old. And I don't even think it was necessarily that. I don't think the sources give him credit. I don't think he was really a fan of the social war, because he, again, was a champion of these people. I think he would have been happy to give these people citizenship. So, and look at, like Saturnius, he's friends with Saturnius and Glaucia. They do those crimes, and he does arrest them himself. And he does try to save their lives still, which you can say whatever you want. Trying to save life is probably a good thing. There's a lot of actions. And if this is true, if this is really what happened, if Marius genuinely admitted him entry into his home and saved Sulla's life and get him safe passage out of Rome, this paints a picture of an incredibly just and honorable Marius. That's why I said Marius is such an interesting figure, because it's this tale of two characters. It's like we don't know which one was the real one because there's so much propaganda against him. I digress. Sorry, I got lost in that. But that is the Marian story. The Marian story, and the story of them is that Sulla, in this kind of cunning plan, asks Marius to help him, and Marius, being this noble guy, does help him. And as you recall, Marius, who did effectually cover up the death of Nonius, who Saturnius had killed, was not, and literally put down Glaucia and Saturnius over another political death of Memmius. This is a guy who does try to be just and is not a fan of this political assassination. So he does. It makes sense to me that he would have saved Sulla, and I think this is actually the more likely scenario. In Sulla's account of this exact scenario, everything leading up to it is the same. Quintus flees, his son and Sulla's son-in-law is murdered by the mob. Sulla says that the mob forced him into Marius' house. And this is why I think this account is a little, I don't believe it. Sulla says the mob forced him into his house, and then Marius demanded that Sulla talk strategy with him. And the whole thing was this big plan that Sulla could get the advice on how to fight Mithridates from Marius. Or, this is what the people wanted, so it made Marius happy. It's like, none of it really makes any sense to me. Marius wanted command. It doesn't make sense that he would try and give you strategic advice, even he knows you're not going to give him credit. You're not, it's like, I just find Sulla's account of this to be a little far-fetched, but it is possible nonetheless, that the mob did lead him there, did and force him to, try and talk strategy with Marius. It's just that we do know for a fact that they killed his son-in-law and Quintus's son. I don't think the mob was, going to spare Sulla, who is the head of basically the figurehead of their opponents. It just doesn't really make sense to me. So I find the first account more likely, but just know there are two. And of course, Sulla's account also is that it's a very strange account, because he also is kind of talking about how we're trying to say, well, no, I actually didn't go there to flee the mob. I wasn't afraid of the people. I was just going there to talk strategy with Marius. So then the whole account changes from no, I was never being chased or anything like that by the people. No. And why did I hide in Marius' house? Well, I just wanted to seek, the guy who I absolutely don't think should be commanding the forces, and I crash out over it. I also went to him for strategy advice. You know what I mean? It just seems a little far-fetched, but whatever. all accounts on that seem, from Sulla's perspective, seem a little far-fetched, but I digress. Regardless of whatever story you believe, the fact of the matter is Sulla escaped the angry mob and made his way down to Capua, where he rejoined his men and immediately set sail to fight Mithridates, for fear that obviously with the coming election, his command would be removed. So now with Sulla gone, Sulpicius gets into power, and Sulpicius gives Marius command of the Mithridatic War. Sulpicius is happy. He gets to pass his laws. He helps the new Italian citizens. And you can say, like, was this like his grand scheme? Like, he gets power and helps out the citizens. It furthers their citizenship. Sure, but it's still a good thing that he did. I guess we can get very technical and you can get into the nitty gritty and like, was it a good thing long term? I mean, not for the Republic, but I don't think it's a very extremely nuanced issue. But at the end of the day, Sulpicius sought to help the newly added citizenry and expand their actual citizenship. So at the end of the day, he did what he said he was going to do for them. So Sulla hears this over in, Cappadocia, Turkey, while he's on his way east towards Mithridates. Hears about the benefits to the Italian citizenry, or the new Italian citizenry, if you will. And he hears about, most importantly, Marius being given command of the Mithridatic War. He doesn't want to give up command. And so he has all of his soldiers gather around and he addresses them. You see, the men, not just the men, and as I previously mentioned, but the men knew this war was going to be easy. They believed that there was a lot of wealth for them to plunder. And the soldiers themselves, in this time of deep factionism within Rome, feared that Marius, once given command, would not use them and would find his own men who supported him. Sulla decides to inform the men of this great indignity done to him by Sulpicius and Marius. He kind of paints this as like, I have been wronged. I was the consul. They held the election even though I was on vacation. They've abdicated me from power. This is my command. I was the governor of this even before the consulship. And look at them. They're trying to snake me out of my position. And that's not really true. I mean, you could make the argument either way, because using the newly citizenized Italians is, it's a political move for sure. At the same time, it's still the election, and it's what you as a Roman agreed to. So it's tough to kind of pick a side. At the end of the day, Sulla is telling the men and instilling in them this great indignity that's been done to him by Sulpicius and Marius. So he asks them, and he says, without telling them anything specifically, he just says, please, I beg you, obey my command. And the men respond to Sulla, be of good courage, and lead us to Rome. So that's like, he did not really say exactly what he wanted to do, but the men, again, you have to understand, it's not like, there is a part of it that obviously they support Sulla and his faction, but more so, it's this fear of missing out on the Mithridatic War and being replaced. So that's a lot of money in their pockets, presumably, and they did not want it going somewhere else. They tell Sulla, yeah, wow, this was a crazy injustice. This was really bad. They shouldn't have did that. And again, they did kill his son-in-law. So this was a violent political act. Marius sends 2 tribunes to assume command in the stead of Sulla. However, Sulla's men, they're not going for that. They immediately killed the 2 tribunes, and there's debate on this, whether it was on Sulla's orders or not. Technically, they would have got there before. It's, I don't know what really happened as far as if it was ordered by Sulla or not. But what we do know for sure is that the 2 tribunes that were sent by Marius to assume command were murdered by the men, not by some random dude. So Sulla takes 6 legions and marches on Rome. Every single officer, excluding 1, abandoned Sulla, who they all refused to lead an army against their own country. And mind you, this is just at the end of the social war. If you want to be very technical, There is still pockets of Italian resistance, of a war ongoing. And these men refuse to lead a war, an army, back to Rome. I mean, think about how this would look. So you already have a fractured Italy that you just kind of are starting to mend together. The final pieces are being put in place. And now you want to lead your 6 legions on Rome itself. You have to understand the time period we're in. I mean, we just fought a massive war for this Italian citizenship, and now, just when it's coming to a close and Rome has survived and won these battles, you want to lead 6 legions against Rome herself. This is something that has never been done before. And you couldn't carry your army into Rome. Sulla is about to, and mind you, Sulla fought for Rome in the Social War against these rebels, and he is now about to use this tactic against Rome itself. And you have to look at it from Sulla's perspective. The people who were granted citizenship have just voted him out of power. So the people that he defeated have now effectually curtailed his power. You have to see it from his perspective also. Anyway, as Sulla marches with his 6 legions into Italy, envoys kept meeting with him. And they kept asking, "What is your purpose? Why are you here with these legions?" Multiple envoys. So they kept asking, "Why do you march on Rome?" Sulla only ever responded, "To deliver her from tyrants." So Sulla is now marching on Rome, and Quintus Pompeius sees him and the 6 legions, and he goes out to greet him, and he cheers him on. He says, "This is exactly what we need to do." Marius and Sulpicius are now trying to prepare for Sulla. They see these 6 legions coming to the walls of Rome, and they don't know what to do. Immediately, Sulla and Quintus seize the walls. Sulla enters the city with his legions. As Sulla entered the city, the citizens started firing missiles at him and his forces. Anyone who even attempted to attack Sulla or stop him were threatened to have their houses burned down. And then very quickly, any type of resistance from the citizens was stopped. Marius hastily gathered a very small force, fought Sulla's men who were bringing much shame to Rome. Again, this is a small force that he could muster against 6 legions. They fought the first battle, official battle that was ever fought inside Rome. Very small little skirmish between, armed forces. Marius, seeing that, hey, we're about to get destroyed here, offered slaves freedom. Any slave who joined the fight would be freed. However, seeing how absolutely helpless the odds were and completely outnumbered, not a single slave took that offer and came to their aid. So Marius, kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and as well as a few of the people who could get away and escape in his entourage, and Marian supporters, fled Rome. Sulla punished harshly and reprimanded any soldier who looted anything from Rome. They set up guards all throughout the city to stop any more violence from the citizens onto the soldiers or the soldiers onto the citizens. The very next day, Sulla gathered the people, and he said, "For too long Rome has suffered." He said no law was to be brought to the people before the Senate, and that voting should only be done by the well-to-do citizens, who were of good character, and the pauper and reckless classes should not vote. He proposed many cuts to the tribune's powers, which had been overstepping in recent years. 300 citizens of good standing, according to Sulla, were added to the Senate, and every single act of Sulpicius was annulled. So Sulpicius, still tribune at the time, and Marius, who had been consul 6 times to this point, his son, Marius the Younger, Publius Cethegus, Junius Brutus, Gnaeus and Quintus Granius, Publius Albinovanus, Marcus Litorius, and others among them, about 12 in number, were all exiled from Rome is the term they use. The reality is that, and it was probably more than 12, by the way. We'll call it 12 for now. The term, they say exile. The reality is they were political dissidents of Sulla who were condemned to death upon their capture. So the word exile isn't great, because really it was, these men fled. Marius fled, his son fled, all the people in their entourage fled because they had to. It wasn't like we had a trial and you're exiled. No, you were politically thrown out from your country and you had to flee on the punishment or the fear of death. So and again, these people did kill Sulla's son-in-law and the Quintus's son. It's not like they're innocent. This is the same populace who did that. All of them were declared enemies of Rome. Sulpicius was soon caught and killed, and obviously Marius escaped. He was captured in Mithridates, and the magistrates, even though it was supposed to be immediate condemning him to death, they decided we're going to have a trial anyway. And that's where I told you that story about the lady who was very favorable to him, even though they thought she wouldn't be. But at the end of their trial, they decided, we're going to condemn him to death. He's an enemy of Rome. We don't want to shake things up too much. Marius is captured in Mithridates. I just want to mention this briefly. Mithridates was loyal to Rome during the social war. I think that's an important point to mention. The magistrates still decided to condemn him to death, but they could not find a single citizen in the city who was willing to kill Marius. So the story goes that they employed a Gaul to kill him. There's also the story that they used a Cimbri. I like to always say it was a Cimbri because it it just makes the story a little bit more well-rounded, but we don't know. What we do know is that a Gaul or a Cimbri were used. But upon this Cimbrian walking into the dark room of Marius, he said that his eyes looked like flames. As he said, "You dare kill Gaius Marius?" To which the Cimbri went screaming out of the room, "I cannot kill Gaius Marius." The magistrates and the people then aided Marius in his escape. He ends up rejoining his son and other exiled supporters while they waited for their opportunity. Recap this just for a second. So Sulla takes 6 legions and marches on Rome. Marius and that party and his supporters are all forced to flee from Rome. Now, obviously, Sulla decides to address the people and say, his political beliefs. That's what that whole speech is. And his political beliefs are that the plebeian class, these reckless people, they don't deserve any right in deciding anything about Roman affairs. And his mind is that, or his ideas are that, the people who are, reckless and are not well-to-do citizens, sober-minded individuals, they don't belong in the decision-making process. That is his political belief, and that was the political belief of many Romans. That is kind of the foundation of a republic. You elect the proper officials who, in turn, make the decisions for you. That is what a republic is. And so he is a Republican. Marius and their camp are populists. They're for the people. They want the vote to be decided by the people. Like we said in the previous videos, they had oaths. They expanded the power of the tribunes, which is the tribune of the plebs. They expanded the citizenship of the Italians. It was just this constant pushing and pushing and pushing of the people and the plebeian class's powers over Rome. And obviously, Sulla completely disagrees with this and lets the people know. This leads to this clashing on what the right thing to do is. So obviously, Sulla now has the power in Rome, and he's forced them out of the city. And Sulpicius was killed. So it's very hard to. Both these sides are doing wrong things to each other. But I digress. Sulla, again, you see this clear divide in the people who want these elected officials, the high-class, well-to-do individuals controlling everything, and the plebeians who want more power. Now, can you blame Sulla? Because in the time that the tribunes have grown more and more powerful, the powers of Rome have suffered, and it's caused, literally, the causation of the social war was these competing ideas and these competing political entities vying for power. So, and not only that, not only did it spark a social war in Rome where you had half of Italy revolt against you, it also has led these people to commit very, very terrible sins. We're talking about assassination and murder, all in the aims of expanding their power. Now, mind you, the Optimates were not clear of this either. They also engaged in political assassination. It's like, this is why it's so tough to pick a side in it, like to say one's to pick a side in terms of like moral high ground. I don't think you can give either side moral high ground. They both have done very terrible things. What you have to decide for yourself is who you think is right. And that's a topic for another day. Right now, we're just going over what happened. I digress. I just want you to understand what Sulla was saying and wanted, and what Marius and his people were saying and wanted. Now, Marius, who is captured in Mithridates, who was, again, loyal to Rome in the social war, so did not revolt, refuses to kill Gaius Marius and grants him freedom. And mind you, this man is the savior of Rome, saved Italy from the Cimbri. That carries a lot of weight still. He escapes and joins with his son. Meanwhile, in Rome, Marius supporters just biding their time. If you were, on Marius' side, if you were a popularity, you're just waiting. You're waiting for the right moment. And you think maybe Marius will come back. You don't know. They knew that there's no way that the citizenry in Rome are going to fight against Sulla's legions. So we just have to accept this for the time being. So now there's still another army. There's multiple armies, but the main army in Italy, they decide to give control of it to Quintus Pompeius, who is or was the consul with Sulla. That main army was under the command of Gnaeus Pompeius, the guy who was probably the second best general for Rome in the social war, just had his forces taken away. And mind you, that social war is still ongoing. The remnants, the last bits of it are still going on, but it's for the most part over. Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius is still fighting the social war, but he's kind of clearing it up. Gnaeus Pompeius, who has the largest Italian force, has now just had to relinquish his position. And he's not really too happy about it, but honorable guy, he does it. So the next day, Quintus comes in, the men gather around him, and they murder Quintus. They do not want Quintus as their commander. The first day the guy gets there, they murder him. With that, Gnaeus Pompeius returns, and he is furious. All of the alleged guilty members of Quintus Pompeius's murder desert the forces and just try and escape. Allegedly, allegedly. He chews them out. He says this was an illegal killing. It should not have been done. But nonetheless, he still resumes command, so he couldn't have been too mad. At this point now, Gnaeus Pompeius has returned to the control of his forces in Italy, and new consuls are elected, Cinna and Octavius. Now, right at the start of their consulship, they kind of talk about the tribes. Biggest ticket item for Cinna and Octavius is the new citizens. We got to talk about this for a second. Recap the social war. What were the war goals of both sides? Obviously for Rome, end this war. And for the Italians, they wanted citizenship to kind of quell most of these rebellions. And at the end, they acquiesced and gave them citizenship. And, so that's what happened. There's this influx of these Italian citizens into Rome. And by citizens, I mean your citizenship. You're still living where you are. And then that was the argument. The Italians were like, hey, we are a part of you. We've helped you. We are as Roman as you guys are. We deserve citizenship. The Romans, in order to kind of give them citizenship but make it meaningless, made 10 new tribes. So the way voting was done by these people in the tribal system was that at the present, before this, there were 35 tribes, and each group belonged to them. Each specific group belonged to them. And they permitted 10 new tribes to be made and added all of the new citizens to these 10 tribes. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, that's good, right? No, it's not, because 35 tribes meant that the original Romans always would be able to decide the vote in whatever way they wanted before the last 10 tribes even got the chance to vote. So it was just a meaningless vote. You were citizens in name only. Your vote did not matter at all. The citizens who accepted it first grew to understand what it was, and this aggravated them. So obviously, they wanted reforms. They wanted to be dispersed among the present 35 tribes. This is what they thought would be the best idea to make their votes matter. Cinna heard their pleas and said, hey, that's actually a very logical thing. I agree with it. Octavius thought it was absolutely ridiculous. He said, this is going to undermine the whole reason we dispersed them in these 10 tribes and made their votes not matter. I'm not going to put them into the 35 tribes and make their votes matter. And Cinna was like, well, I'm gonna. So they obviously quarreled over this. And so Cinna and some of the new citizens went to the forum, again, as they like to do, these populares, with hidden daggers, and they demanded to be added to existing tribes so their votes mattered. Octavius gathered some men, rushed to the forum, and threw Cinna out of the city. And his men, without orders, began to kill the new citizens who were, there with the daggers. So now, Cinna has just been exiled from Rome. He was elected consul, and now he was cast out by Octavius, his other consul. And the men killed all the people who had gathered in the forum. And again, this is one of those cases where you say, yes, absolutely, the populares did use this tactic of bringing daggers and, assassinating and political opponents many, many times. Did they do it this time? Because, they're very keen on saying the men without orders slaughtered the citizens. And it almost seems like the daggers thing was like oh, yeah, we went down there, we rushed down there because they were gathering. We threw them out, and it's like, just say they had daggers, Just we did that because they had daggers, guy. You know what I mean? I'm just saying we don't know. We don't know. It's within the bounds of reality that they absolutely did bring daggers and were causing this insurrection ruckus. But it's also possible that Cinna or that Octavius just saw them gathering and went down there with armed forces and casted out Cinna. So Cinna, having been cast out, went to the cities like Nola, for example, that had been granted citizenship newly into Rome, and urged them to revolt. Which, mind you, these guys just fought a war against Rome, got their citizenship, but it was very easy to convince them. Why? Because their citizenship ultimately didn't matter. It was, not to say fake, you still had a lot of the rights of the citizens, but when it came to voting, which was the most important thing for them at the time, it still didn't matter at all. So it was very easy not only to get money from these cities, but also soldiers. A few senators in Rome actually joined Cinna. Gaius Milo, Quintus Sertorius, and our guy, Gaius Marius the Younger, the son of Gaius Marius, all joined him. And the Senate decreed Cinna, due to fleeing, was not a consul. They elected Lucius Marula. So Cinna was very upset, and he meets with the Roman forces in Capua. He says to them, "From you, citizens, I received this authority. The people voted it to me. The Senate has taken it away from me without your consent. Although I am the sufferer by this wrong, I grieve amid my own troubles equally for your sakes. What need is there that we should solicit the favor of the tribes in the elections hereafter? What need have we of you? Where will after this be your power in the assemblies, in the elections, in the choice of consuls, if you fail to confirm what you bestow, and whenever you give your decision, fail to secure it?" Cinna began to rip his clothes and lay on the floor. The men picked him up and declared their support. He incited all of the newly citizenized towns to aid him, since it was on their behalf that he worked, and it was on their behalf that led him to be stripped of the consulship. Because of this, and it really seemed in earnest from Cinna, they all supported him. And so Lucius and Octavius prepared for war. They summoned Gnaeus Pompeius to defend Rome. Gaius Marius, who's still exiled, hears of all this, and he decides this is his moment. And he rushes back with his entourage to Italy. And he also goes through a lot of the newly citizenized towns and promises to aid them in their quest for citizenship completely earnestly. So because of this, he receives 6,000 Etruscans and he joins up with Cinna. I want to quickly go back to what I was saying. So Marius, after his exile, comes back, goes to these towns, shows honestly and earnestly that he will support them in their citizenship. I think this is probably the best evidence we have for when he stepped down in a social war, it being more of a political reason than it really, as the sources say, due to the infirmities that he faced. Because in reality, I just don't think that the social war was necessarily something he even agreed with. I think he was not exactly, and as we see from Saturnius and Glaucia, the man was never willing to have these great big political revolts. He was not a fan of this, so he wasn't never going to revolt personally against Rome, but he wanted to support these citizens. And now, having been ousted from power with legions marched on Rome itself, he says, hey, we have to gather the forces. It's our time to take back Rome. And the promise he gives is these Italians, I will give you the citizenship that you seek. And the fact that he was so willing and honest, I think speaks volumes to his stepping down during the social war. Anyway, so Cinna and Marius camp out on the Tiber River. Cinna, Marius, and Sertorius encircle the city and cut off the food supply. In the meantime, Marius captures Ostia, and Cinna sends forces to capture Arminum. Inside Rome, Octavius and Lucius were nervous. They realized they needed far more men than what they had, and so they ordered Caecilius Metellus to make peace with the Samnites. But he refuses the Samnites' terms. Marius heard this and vowed to accept their demands, so the Samnites joined Marius. So now, they're getting ready to fight. Gnaeus Pompeius has his forces stationed there, the main defense, and this small skirmish breaks out. A lightning storm hits, and Gnaeus Pompeius is killed. What probably really happened is the camp was full of disease. They had cut off from their food supply and probably didn't have the greatest water supply. So this outbreak goes on in the military camp of Gnaeus Pompeius, and Gnaeus Pompeius probably, more than likely, dies to that disease. We know that either way, when he was killed, his men literally paraded his corpse in the streets. Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo, while a very successful general, essentially, is responsible with Sulla equally for winning the social war, was a harsh disciplinarian and was very hard on his forces, and this made him unliked. As this happens, Marius keeps going, and he captures Antium, Aricia, Lanuvium, and a few other places. And after this, via the Appian Way, Marius and Cinna march on Rome. The Senate was alarmed and immediately sued for peace. So Marius and Cinna are now marching on Rome. Metellus Macedonius, who the people rallied behind and said, we will declare you as consul. We'll forget Octavius and Lucius. We don't need them. We will declare you as our leader if you can just defend us from Marius. So Metellus Macedonius says, absolutely not. Go back to your consul. Refuses to raise an army and fight this war any further against Marius. And he actually leaves Rome, for the foreseeable future of the immediate violence that's about to be present. So I always liked Metellus Macedonius. I feel like he got unlucky, but he always knew. I think, no one ever really lived out the phrase, you gotta know when to hold them and you gotta know when to fold them, better than Metellus Macedonius. So Cinna asked, as the Senate approached him, are you coming to me asking for peace as a consul or a citizen? They had no answer. They didn't know what to say. Many of the citizens defected to Cinna's side because, like we said, they were kind of just waiting for the other shoe to drop because, they were always on the Marius and Cinna's side. It just, needed, they didn't want to fight Sulla's 6 legions. And now, again, not only did people who defect to Cinna's side who were on his side Out of fear of, starvation, a lot of these people defected over to Cinna because the food supply had been cut. So the Senate returns to Cinna and permitted him entry as consul. And as they talked and talked and talked, Marius just kept staring at them in silence. And as they went to enter, Marius said, "Men banished cannot enter the city." And he demanded a vote to repeal their banishment. So the Senate gathers all the tribes for a vote. They enter Rome. Octavius was urged to flee, but he refused, and a small band caught Octavius, cut off his head, and gave it to Cinna, where it was displayed in the forum. The bloodshed of Marius and Cinna is often stated to be immensely cruel. It is largely exaggerated, but we do know of about 14 opposition party members who were killed. I want to be clear. This is a very contentious topic because they were literally, Sulla literally marched 6 legions on Rome, and there's stories, and I believe that he refused the men from looting, and I believe that, he was rather honorable and tried to curtail violence as much as he could. But it does not change the fact that all of the 12, 14, 15 members of Marius's entourage, if you will, were condemned to death and declared enemies of Rome, who were political opponents. And you used 6 legions to oust them from that. So they come back and they kill 14 people who were political opponents. That bloodshed gets, greatly exaggerated. This is kind of where Marius gets the stain on his reputation from. But at the same time, it's very tough to verify how cruel he actually was. And it's very tough to verify who were the nobles who supported Sulla and perhaps gave Sulla aid and might have even, aided and would have been happy to have Marius killed, So it's really tough. This is a tough scenario, but either way, we do know 14 opposition party members were killed. Not great. Cinna frees some slaves to help him take the city. It was said that this was Marius's bodyguards, from some of the sources, but either way, Marius or Cinna permitted some freed slaves as their bodyguards in the city. And they were incredibly violent. They would lash out not just on who, was a political opponent, but just anyone. So Cinna decides to gather up some forces and murders them in the night while they're sleeping, because he's like, these guys are just too crazy. Catulus, Marius' colleague from the Cimbrian War, and Lucius were to be put on trial. And, it was, pretty much understood that they were probably going to be killed either way, but they were given the trial. Both of them decided to end their lease on life instead of facing trial. Lucius, quote, cut his veins, and Catulus suffocated himself with a fire. Now, they've reclaimed Rome from Sulla's forces and Octavius. The Bellum Octavianum is done with a victory for Cinna, and now Cinna and Marius have been elected consul. Cinna's 2nd, Marius's 7th consulship. So here you have it. This is Sulla's march on Rome. What has it led to? It's led to this military force against Rome itself. Kind of a sad thing to see. So just to recap everything for you in short, Marius and Sulpicius sought to expand the rights of the new Italian citizens. Sulla did not wish to do that at all. In fact, he wished to curtail the powers of the tribune and the plebs. He was busy with the Mithridatic War. They tried to stop Sulpicius from gaining power by declaring a vacation. Sulpicius and an armed mob kill Quintus Pompeius' son. Sulla is saved from the angry mob by Marius and then led to Capua, where he goes to fight the Mithridatic War. Sulpicius, now in power, gives Marius command of the Mithridatic War. Sulla, hearing about losing the command, urges the men to follow him to Rome. They don't want to lose all the riches from the Mithridatic War, so they decide, we'll follow you to Rome. All of the officers except one desert Sulla. Sulla marches on Rome, They ask him, the envoys sent from Rome ask, what are you doing? Why are you marching on Rome? He says, to free her from tyrants. Sulla, with 6 legions, enters Rome. There's some fighting, but very briefly, Marius and his supporters are forced to flee. Sulpicius is caught and killed. Sulla dictates to the people his political beliefs and what he believes should happen, how he can save the Republic, and decides to leave to go fight Mithridates. Cinna and Octavius become elected consuls. In the meantime, they are at odds. Cinna wants to redistribute the 10 new Italian tribes into the original 35. Octavius is completely against this. Octavius throws Cinna out of the city. The Senate makes Cinna no longer consul. Cinna gathers support of the rebels from the Social War who had been granted the citizenship. Marius, seeing this, comes back, also vows to give them citizenship and help them out in earnest. They very quickly capture Rome itself from Octavius. The Bellum Octavianum is over, and Sulla's march on Rome has led Marius to his 7th consulship in an indirect way. And that is kind of where we're at right here. Just briefly, 17 days after being elected consul for the 7th time, Gaius Marius dies. And he was a very old man at this point, so Valerius Flaccus takes his place. But just as this happens, Sulla has finished the war with Mithridates and is headed back to Rome with his loyal troops, fresh off of a great victory, which granted them much plunder and resources. Dun dun dun! Tune in next time for Sulla's March on Rome, Part 2. No, next time we're going to be covering officially Sulla's Civil War. So, I just wanted to give you the build-up of Sulla's Civil War, which is the March on Rome and Marius and the Bellum Octavianum. This is an incredibly interesting little prelude to everything, and I think if you have a good understanding of this, it just helps you understand why Sulla's Civil War happened. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Sulla's March on Rome is one of the most interesting moments in Roman history, and the what I like to call the Marius March on Rome, also known as the Bellum Octavianum. You see that counter. It's very interesting. And so this is the build-up. All this is why we have Sulla's Civil War. So get ready for that because it's in the pipeline. And see you guys in the next one.